All right, so colonial New England, and we're going to look at the creation of the Massachusetts Bay Colony today. And you can see from this opening image a Puritan family right in front of their what's referred to as a colonial salt box home. These very basic rectangular like structures that pop up all over New England and are still there to this day. They build their homes really quick, right to the main roads. You could walk from the road right to the door. And there's one that exists right now in Lexington that is still there at Minuteman National Park that I love to go to and check out. And if you look at the family, this is a pretty typical image of a Puritan family. Puritans had roughly 8 to 12 children per family. And keep in mind, those are living children. Many children at this time did not make it, unfortunately. There were high rates of death in childbirth and stillborns, which is horrible to think about, but nonetheless, still 8 to 12 kids per family. That is a lot of children. That's a lot of little Puritans, right? And we can think about their coming to the not the United States, the Americas, as truly a religious exodus. So like Moses in the Old Testament leaving Egypt and taking a religious journey to free his people, that's what the Puritans believe that they're doing. And they come here between 1629 and 1641, about 23,000 of them. So we already have Plymouth, right, in southeastern Massachusetts. They create Boston. They're the founders of Boston in 1630, right? So one of the things that is driving the Puritans out of England, because they are largely from what's called East Anglia, the same area in England, this threat of civil war. The Puritans are really going to rise up against King Charles, and there's religious strife in England, and there's threat of civil war between Anglicans and their church and Puritan radical reformers like that of Oliver Cromwell that you see here. So a lot of people, whether you're Cavalier or even a Puritan, don't want to stay around for the fight. You don't want to risk it, so you leave for the New World. Add that to the fact that a lot of these Puritans are losing their rights to practice their religion freely. The king is trying to create one kingdom, one religion, everything traditional Anglicanism, and they don't fit into the New England, so they are going to go and create a New England elsewhere. And here's a poem. There'll be some poems today about New England, and I'll read it to you folks. This is actually from 1630, talking about New England. You talk of New England, I truly believe. Old England's grown new and doth us deceive. I'll ask you a question or two by your leave. And is not old England grown anew? New fashions in houses, new fashions at table. The old servants discharge, the new are more able. And every old custom is but an old fable. Then talk you no more of New England. New England is where the old England did stand, new furnish, new fashion, new woman, new man, and is not old England grown new. So you have New England, this New England that is in the place of Old England. But if you want to go to the true Old England where the traditions and the old customs are preserved, you don't go to the Old England, you go to the New England. So saying that the customs, the traditions are going to be better preserved in the new world than they are going to be in the old world. Like for Puritans, if something was new or fresh or novel, then it was bad. They actually looked to the past as a better time. They believed as history went forward that new ideas had kind of taken away from Christianity, from the greatness of God. And they looked back and wanted to restore older times. A lot of them are very literate. They're coming from East Anglia, as I said before, this great migration. And when they come over, when we talk about the South, a lot of these indentured servants, largely men, are coming over alone. They're coming over as laborers. They're coming over for economic reasons. However, in New England, they're coming as family units. They're coming as towns. They're coming as villages. It's mom, brother, sister, dog, uncle. Everyone's on the ship, and the entire community is going. And interestingly, if you ever go to the place where the Puritans originally came from, you might see towns like Hingham. You might see towns like Yarmouth. A lot of the place names are exactly the same. They literally just cross the ocean and try to rebuild England, but with their distinct form of Christianity. They distrust unmarried adults. 94 to 98% of all men and women were married. You were expected to be married and have a large family. That was a symbol of God's approval. It's from the Puritans that you'll get the splinter colonies of Rhode Island and Connecticut as they branch out. Has anyone here ever been to Hingham, Massachusetts? If you go to Hingham, you can actually go to Old Ship Church. And Old Ship Church is actually the only surviving, continually used church from the 1600s in New England. It is truly a gem. So if you go to Old Ship Church, it's actually where the Puritans met in the 1680s. It is that old. And a lot of the people in Hingham were shipbuilders. So they crafted a lot of the building in the form of a ship. And you can see that the outside is very kind of plain, very simple, very austere. These Calvinists, very intense Calvinists that want to reform the Church of England from within inside it, they believe in things like predestination. So before you're born, God has decided whether or not you're going to heaven or hell. They believed in things like limited atonement, that Christ didn't die for everyone to have their sins forgiven. Only a small elect of true Christians would have God's grace and they would be allowed to go to heaven. However, the vast majority of humanity are going to burn in hell forever. And you have to prove that you are really part of the chosen, that you are among the saints. So it's kind of a culture where you believe there's a lot of suffering in the world. You believe that life is truly trials and tribulations and that you want to focus on getting to paradise in the afterlife. And there's a good chance that you might not get there. So a lot of people, their entire lives, spiritually struggle to prove that they are among the elect and that God loves them. Here's actually the interior of Old Ship Church. And you can see that the pulpit there, in the 1600s, there would have been an eye on the pulpit because it's the ever-present, watchful eye of God, knowing everything that you do, whether you sin, whether you not sin, everything about your life, and that it's omnipresent. And they also have, interestingly, a very devout belief in God and predestination, but they also have a devout belief in Satan and evil, and that evil is an active, very real force in the world trying to bring down the saints. So if you believe, that you are crossing the world, you're going to create this godly community, you also believe that Satan is going to try and follow you. Satan is going to try and destroy you. Who does Satan bring into his midst to help destroy godly people? Witches. There we go. We can see some hocus pocus stuff here, right? And they get some of these beliefs where it says in Exodus, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." And they have interesting beliefs that, particularly women, but men sometimes too, would go out into the forest. And when they went into the forest, they would meet Satan or the devil or one of the devil's minions. They'd cut their hand or whatever, and then they would sign away their soul in blood in the devil's book. After that, they would become servants of the devil for some kind of material or otherworldly gain, and that would explain things, weird things that happened in their community, like maybe smallpox or measles might be the workings of the devil. If you lost children, it might be because you are being bewitched by Satan or a witch in your community. And it truly creates a form of social paranoia that will erupt into the Salem witch trials. You can see that stone there. That's a spirit stone. Farmers would actually put those on the edge of their properties as kind of like a talisman to try to keep evil spirits away. That one was found in New Hampshire at Witchstone Farm, which is pretty interesting to think about. Childhood. Let's talk about childhood. I'm going to read you guys another quick poem about childhood. And this one's from Anne Bradstreet, a Puritan woman. "Ah me, conceived in sin and born in sorrow, a nothing here today, but gone tomorrow, whose mean beginning blushing can't reveal, but night and darkness with shame conceal. With tears into this world I did arrive, my mother still did waste as I did thrive. Who yet would love in all elasticity, spending was willing to be spent for me. With wayward cries I did disturb her rest, who sought still to appease me with her breast. With infancy was past my childishness, did act folly that it could express. From birth stained with Adam's sinful fact, from these gained to sin as soon as act. A perverse will, a love to what's forbid, a serpent's sting in pleasing face lay hid, a lying tongue as soon as it could speak, and fifth commandment do daily break. Children are naturally sinful. Children are naturally stubborn. Children are naturally going to go against God's will, and they literally had a practice called the breaking of the will. They wanted children to have no will of their own and to completely surrender themselves to God. So they would do the breaking of the will throughout their early lives. And it is absolutely brutal. So when they think back to their childhood, it's not this nostalgic happiness of sunshine and sprinklers and lollipops and umbrellas. It's beatings, emotional, verbal abuse. It is a time of suffering and sorrow. It is absolutely unjoyous. Unbroken children who technically did not have their will broken, they would be tied into small balls and they would be booted across the floors of the home. Others would be dangled outside of windows on the second floor, and others would be forced to kneel on sharp sticks. They would try to make them understand that they were going to die. There's actually talks about times when Puritans would lead their children to open graves, force them to stare in it, meditate on it almost, and think about the fact that their time on this earth was finite, that they would only be here a little while, and they better shape up and make sure that they are among God's elect. Puritan families, once again, 8 to 12 kids.
The good old days.
Very strict, very, very strict. They taught mental discipline, little amounts of affectionate love, a lot of work, and of course they did use physical force. And then roughly about the time that you would hit puberty, they would actually send you out. Most of the time you would not live with your own family. There's too much affection there. There's too much familiarity there. They want you to focus on God and not your own family. And they would send you out to live with different families. Oftentimes that family might teach you a skill, teach you a trade. However, you are literally forced out of your home. 90% of Puritan children had biblical names. So some common names for boys would be John, Joseph, Samuel, Josiah, those kind of old school Hebrew Old Testament names. Some common names for girls would be Mary, Sarah, Elizabeth, Hannah, Rebecca, Anne, Deborah, Huldah, Abigail, Rachel, Ruth. So a lot of those names that are like, oh, these are typical American names. They're like, a lot of times come from the Old Testament, the New Testament, and Christianity, and brought over with the Puritans. Great respect for the elderly, and you could not go against them. Children were expected to behave really as mini adults, doing chores, attending church services, and you go all the time. You do not just go on Sundays. You are a constant at church. Any show of really kind of untempered emotion, excitement, fear, anger was discouraged. Disobedience severely punished, and children rarely got to play, sing, but they actually did play something called town ball. And town ball was the grandfather of baseball. Puritans would have a game where they had 4 bases and sticks, and they brought that over from England, and that would develop into baseball. Fun courtship ritual. So with Puritans, interestingly, we talk about how kind of brutal they were to their children, but true affectionate love between man and woman, was actually very much a part of their marriage and their culture. They had civil marriages, so they didn't get married in church. They got married via the government, but having true affectionate love was the foundation of a happy and sustaining marriage. And they created these courtship rituals to figure out whether or not you were compatible with the person that you were going to marry. So something like called tarrying. So they would tarry, and you would have a board in between you. So you could actually come over, gentlemen, and spend the night with the lady. However, the lady is going to have her legs tied together. She is going to be sewn into a sack, and you will have a board in between you, and you are going to be supervised for most of the night. You get to talk all night. You get to realize if you're compatible. You get to build bonds of affection. And if it doesn't work out, hey, it doesn't work out, and the courtship ritual starts all over again. And you actually have to have the family's approval in order to court their daughter and start to build a relationship. Here is the courtship stick. This is another courtship ritual. There was a stick that was 6 to 8 feet in length, and it was like a little whisper phone. And you could be completely surrounded by the family, but you could send little affectionate love messages back and forth. Like, hey, that bonnet, baby, looks so good on you. Sorry. And then we get into some of their laws, and their laws are quite heavy-handed, and they do believe in shaming. How do you stop people from sinning and you make them follow God's law is you shame them into submission, publicly shame them. Like there was a couple that was having an affair on their spouses, and 40 people rounded them up, shamed them, gave them fines, put them in prison, and it was quite disturbed. There's one law that forbade the wearing of lace for ladies. It was considered sinful into like you're celebrating yourself too much if you wear lace. It was against the law for a man to wear long hair or to smoke in the street. So when you see a guy who has a man bun with a jewel in his mouth, the Puritans would have hated that guy completely. They would have stoned him on the spot. A young man could not date a young lady without the consent of her parents. A man was not permitted to kiss his wife in public. Some guy was actually put in the stocks for that. And the stocks are that situation you see behind us where they would literally put you in like the town square, chain you into it. Sometimes it'd just be your feet, sometimes it'd be your arms and everything. But it was a way for people to see you, to shame you, and for you to change your behavior. If I could use a Puritan method to make kids do homework, is if they didn't do their homework, I would saran wrap them to the stop sign as everyone is leaving school, and we would all just, maybe go, shame, 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 shame. If that's not harsh enough, Christmas is forbidden. No Christmas, ladies and gentlemen. Christmas, they believed, was too pagan. Santa Odin, all these kind of interesting little pagan bleed-ins and from Yule into Christmas. So the Puritans actually, for being so into Jesus and to God and everything, did not like Christmas celebration. The Puritans were actually so worried about the afterlife and not overindulging in sin that they actually would moderate their diets, and they would eat just kind of plain bread or plain beans. And they would not, eat lobster or eat fish. And they had this very simple, austere diet that they believed kept them away from sin. And there's actually Puritans that write in their diaries about how terrible it was that they overate and that they'd need to atone and maybe fast for a day. And these people were very much focused on the afterlife and were very cognizant of, their standing in society. So John Winthrop is going to become their leader. And what the Puritans are trying to do, ladies and gentlemen, they refer to themselves as the city on a hill. They believe that they have a covenant, a special agreement with God, that they would be the restorers and that they would bring true Christianity to the world. And thus God, of course, would be on their side, helping them the entire way. And by the way, if you're a Quaker or you're another religion, get out. Get out. We don't want you here. It's actually legal to beat up and lynch Quakers, a different type of Christianity. So it's like when Pilgrims or Puritans, they came over for religious freedom for themselves, right? They didn't want other forms of Christianity around them. They wanted to do their own thing, have their own godly community, their own way. If you don't like that, they would banish you. Like Rhode Island was created by Roger Williams, who was kicked out of Massachusetts. They kicked him out like midwinter and told him to just walk into the forest and probably hope that he died. Anne Hutchinson, a woman, was kicked out as well, and she was slaughtered in the forest with all her followers. They had local town government where they would have town meetings where they would elect representatives to meet in a general court for the entire colony. Only white churchmen of property could vote. That's pretty typical for this time throughout the colonies. Though women did have a lot of influence in the church. Their life centers around the church. You can see this is a pretty typical New England town. Even nowadays, when you drive around Duxbury or Bridgewater or Plymouth or Taunton, oftentimes you'll see that big white steeple church in the center of town. Around it is the Rotary that used to be the village green, where people would take their cows, their pigs, to go and graze. And you can still see the mark of the Puritans on our landscape. Their economy, they made a killing off cod fishing. They made a lot. So when you think of the South, think tobacco. When you think of the North, think fishing and farming. Very into cod fishing. That's a codfish actually above our state legislature. That is, it was so foundational to our society that's actually hanging up in our state capitol nowadays. It is not real. It is wooden. It's actually been stolen a few times too. Like MIT kids will think it's really hilarious for their senior prank to like steal the codfish, and it'll end up somewhere weird. But that is kind of a basic introduction to the Puritans.